All right, APGovers, it is Wednesday, March 18th, the day after St. Patrick's Day. I hope you guys are all doing well. Social distancing yourselves as intelligently as you possibly can. I know it's only been 3 days. For me, it seems like it's been a lot longer than that we haven't been in class, but I appreciate you guys keeping up and trying to make your way through this material as we go through these unique times. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the last portions of the chapter from the textbook and throw some additional kind of items that really should be part of a discussion on some other groups in regards to civil rights. Now, to be fair, I would suggest to you that I am completely cheating some of these topics. You could spend an entire semester studying, for example, women's rights and the fight for civil rights. You could study an entire semester in college on the fight for civil rights for the LGBTQ community and many other of the groups we'll point out a little bit here today. But I'm going to give you as much as I feel like you need to know and some things that are significant. So without further ado, we're going to get into the slideshow for today, and that's a wrap up of Chapter 9. And we're going to start with kind of just thinking about women. And so when we think about women, really many people visualize the kickoff of the women's rights movement as the Seneca Falls Convention that you might remember from U.S. history from back in the mid-1800s. From that Seneca Falls Convention, you've got a period of time where women are subject to laws, coverture laws, where basically they don't exist outside the definition of their husband. If they have property, that property automatically becomes their husband's property. And so there are a large variety of complaints for women throughout the 1800s and early 1900s. However, probably the greatest complaint for women and the thing that makes them feel most unequal is the lack of ability to vote and participate in elections. And so the suffrage movement becomes the primary motivation of women throughout the 1800s. Into the early 1900s, and of course, women gained the right to vote with the passage of the 19th Amendment. Now, the problem with the passage of the 19th Amendment was many times for women, it left them without a clear rallying cry or something to unify the movement going forward. And historically, many people look upon the time period between 1920 and 1960 as a period of hibernation for women and civil rights. There was not much going on. And so things slowed down because there wasn't a clear direction for them. Much of that changed as the women's movement in part started to see the fight for advancements that the African American communities were making in the 50s and 60s. It was also severely helped by the writing of Betty Friedan and through the Feminine Mystique, in which she challenged women to consider, are there other roles in their lives that they could fit into within society rather than those that had been previously determined and defined by men? And so Feminine Mystique and Betty Friedan helped women kind of start to ask for more and challenge and question whether there should be more out there as far as them having the right to do more and see themselves as equals within society. And so the backbone of much of the change for women that still exists today and the protection for women really resides in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that I mentioned earlier this week. This law clearly was meant to benefit in large part individuals from racial discrimination, but also as part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it forbids discrimination in employment based upon gender. And so women are given for the first time true legal protection in a situation in which they are not restricted from employment simply because of their sex. Employers cannot simply pick John over Jane because John's got a family at home. Because to be fair, unless we ignore what we learned in health, a woman probably was part of the creation of that family also. And so the Civil Rights Act of 1964 forbids discrimination in employment. It created what is known as a bureaucratic agency, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, whose job really is to ensure that employers are following the Civil Rights Act 64, not discriminating based upon race or gender in employment. And so this gave women a chance to go out and get to the same jobs that men get. Realistically, however, all right, women struggled to get the true best jobs within any kind of organization because they did not have the educational background. So they could still be discriminated against or prevented from, discriminated might be a strong word in that situation, but prevented from getting these jobs because they lacked the experience and skills that their male counterparts did. And so, what truly was the most significant change for women was a law called Title IX, or it's referred to as Title IX. It was from the Secondary Education Act from the early 1970s. Title IX is a section of that law. What this law does, and many people simply think of it and visualize it in regards to athletics, but what Title IX does, and this portion of the law does, is it forbids any public school setting from restricting equal opportunities for women in that environment. And so what you get out of this is you get a situation like the world that you live in now when you go to these advanced level courses, that there are as many women in this classroom as there are men. There's as many girls as there are boys within the classroom setting. That was not the case before the early 1970s. Women were not allowed to take higher level math, science, advanced level courses as those started to be created. Those things were reserved for men because of their station in life. Well, Title IX says you can't do that. You cannot deny somebody an opportunity because of their gender. And those things then also did move into the athletic arena. Before the 1970s, most women did not play any kind of organized athletics. They didn't have the opportunity, but this part of the Secondary Education Act of Title IX required schools to start to create those opportunities. And then so park districts had to create opportunities for young girls to participate in athletics so they could then be actually prepared and ready to train for those things and participate in high school and college. And so schools had to start to add, and they added an extraordinary number of female athletic programs. One of the problems that you get out of any law, though, like we did out of Title IX, was some schools started to just ramp up all of their female programs to try to make the female programs equal to the men. And that generally is what happened for the first 20 plus years or so. Some states and some places decided instead of ramping up all the women's programs to even things out, we'll just cut the men's programs to even things out. And so that's one of the negative consequences you get sometimes when you get laws. The general purpose and the intentions, I think usually we like to think are valid and rightful purposes, but sometimes they have a negative consequence when truly we were trying to get people to add to the women to make it equal to the men's, and where the men are at, some people just chose to reduce the men's as a way to deal with the potential cost or as an act of almost civil disobedience, if you will, to their disagreement with the law. So Title IX and Civil Rights Act really helped women be prepared for the workforce. Right? Now, from the Title IX, women's continued in the 1970s to push for even greater legislation, constitutional protection for them based upon gender. And so an Equal Rights Amendment, which would forbid discrimination based upon gender, was proposed, successfully proposed. It was sent to the states for ratification in the 1970s. Right? However, only 35 states ratified it, and it's required to have, if you remember, right, 3/4 of the states have to ratify, so you have to get 38 out of the 50 states to ratify at a minimum to get things moving forward, and we were a few states short. So the Equal Rights Amendment ended up failing. Some of the reasons for it were legitimate. If you look at the 14th Amendment, some people say women are already protected from equal protection by the 14th Amendment. Some of them were just scare tactics. Women and men will have to use the same bathrooms. Women will have to register for the draft. And so the Equal Rights Amendment failed in the 1970s. It is currently a topic now that people are thinking about more and more, where it's coming back up as a part of discussion. Part of the legal discussion is, do those 35 states have already ratified it? Do they have to ratify it again? Or do we just have to find 3 more states? So it might be interesting during your lifetime to see what happens with that. Now, some of the problems that came for women once they got into the workforce were really twofold. And I would suggest to you, these things can be problematic for men also. But if we're honest, all right, most of these problems are problems that women have to face. And one of those problems is women have to face sexual harassment in the workforce. And with that increased level of women participating in the workforce, they've been subject to more and more inappropriate behavior from men. there are two court cases that I like to think of when I think of protections for women that I think women should know and understand, I think students should know. And the first one was a court case called Harris versus Forklift. This case is important because what they told us in Harris is that there is no single factor that defines what sexual harassment is. In other words, it could be a wide variety of things that could constitute sexual harassment. Meaning also, though, it doesn't have to be just a man harassing a woman. It could be a woman harassing another woman, or a woman harassing a man. It doesn't have to be some kind of quid pro quo sexual relationship that truly defines sexual harassment. It could just be an environment that is defined as being abusive or hostile. Those things could qualify as creating an environment that exists within the sexual harassment definition. That was great, all right? However, one of the problems was that there was nothing really holding employers' feet to the fire until there was a court case from Boca Raton, Farragher versus Boca Raton. In this court case, the Supreme Court said that employers are responsible for their employees. So if I'm an employer and I know that this sexual harassment is going on, or I should know what's going on, and I'm not doing anything about it, the individual can not only sue the person that's harassing them in the workplace, they can sue the employer themselves. And so now the employers actually have some money in the game, and they feel more responsibility. I would tell you 99% of you, when you get a job out of college, you will get sexual harassment training because employers are doing their best to make sure that employees know what kind of behavior is or is not appropriate in the workplace. So that's one thing that women face as an obstacle. Secondly, women face the reality that they're going to struggle to make equal money compared to their male counterparts. You know, today women make approximately 70 to 75 cents on the dollar men. Now, some people might argue that data based upon the jobs that women have compared to the jobs that men have in the workforce. One of the realities that we know is that when it comes to the topic known as comparable worth, in which we try to find a way, or we discuss, should we find a way to make sure that people that have similar jobs that require similar levels of skills and talents in the workplace, that they're paid an equal amount. Well, the Supreme Court has refused really to step in on this issue in regards to equal pay, in part because I believe there might be too much complexity. Would the lawsuits ever end? How would you truly define what is comparable? And so these are kind of things that we have to kind of legislate our way through and hope that we get advancements over time unless the Supreme Court does step in. And the other kind of thing in regards to that lower pay is this reality that many women face known as a glass ceiling, where they can see that next level of advancement above them, but they just can't reach it. The good old boy network perhaps is making it more difficult for them to move from middle management to upper management and make these truly significant levels of income. Now, has there been growth over the last 20 years? Yes. Is there still a way to go? All right, certainly there was still a way to go. What I want to kind of start to end with here are a variety of other groups outside of women that weren't given a ton of time within the section. All right, there were some leanings towards it, but I just wanted to highlight some miscellaneous groups and how the courts think about these miscellaneous groups. So first off, we'll talk about the elderly. All right, their age discrimination is one of those types of discriminations that's protected by civil rights laws, and most of them are primarily aimed at protecting the elderly. Right, there used to be mandatory retirement ages for all types of occupations. 99% of those requirements are now viewed as illegal. You can have some of those mandatory requirements in positions that require public safety as part of them, but generally speaking, those things are illegal. There are other limitations that we get away with limiting the elderly and treating them differently or unequally. As you get older, you have to take driver's road tests more often than a younger individual does. And again, much of the time it comes down just to a situation of public safety. Another miscellaneous group that we should kind of think about, or two miscellaneous groups, are Native Americans and Japanese Americans. Both of which, if we're honest, have suffered through different periods of discrimination in the United States based upon their ethnicity, all right, their nation of origins, etc. Native Americans, what they have in common is, at some point throughout the 20th century, the federal government has passed laws which have made financial compensation to these groups as acknowledgement of previous discrimination. And so there was something called the Indian Claims Act from the middle of the 20th century, which paid money to Native Americans as a result of previous, perhaps unfair, all right, if we're being honest, unfair agreements in regards to land and a variety of other things. And so Native Americans were repaid by the federal government. Japanese Americans were placed into internment camps during World War II. The Supreme Court supported the president's right to issue an executive order to put these individuals into. And so the court at that time didn't say it was illegal, and we really didn't say that we haven't said it's illegal even to this day. However, in the 1980s, all right, early 1990s, the federal government cut checks to ancestors of these Japanese Americans as, again, a way to apologize for, all right, the previous decisions of the United States government. Moving on to a last group, and again, I apologize if we're shortchanging this, and this you could spend an entire semester looking at all of these topics, but the LGBTQ community has also faced discriminations within their past and within the current realities of America. What I'm going to point out are just a couple kind of advancements, all right, and some of them you might think, okay, these are extraordinary advancements. Well, compared to where we were at before, perhaps so, all right. And the first one I've got listed is this policy known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell that was passed in the 1990s under the Clinton administration. Before this law, it was illegal to serve in the United States military if you were a member of the LGBTQ community. If you were a gay individual, if you were homosexual, you could not serve. This law, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, as absurd as it might sound today, allowed these individuals to serve in the military as long as they didn't tell people that they were gay. So you could serve, but you just couldn't tell. Now, the protection was the military could also not ask individuals if they were gay. And so this allowed them to serve for the first time. Those things have expanded extraordinarily since that time period in the 1990s through the Obama administration. There has been some pushback from the Trump administration on transgender serving, individuals serving in the military. We'll kind of see where those things go over the next few years. The Lawrence versus Texas and the Obergefell versus Hodges cases are also two other significant cases that involve the LGBTQ community. Lawrence versus Texas is a Supreme Court ruling that invalidates all laws throughout the country that might have forbid some kind of sexual relationship between same-sex individuals. Lawrence v. Texas says those laws are a violation of individual civil rights and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Obergefell versus Hodges, a case from just a few years ago, was the case in which the Supreme Court stepped in and said that same-sex couples have to be given the legal right to marry, and those marriages have to be given full faith and credit in all the states in the United States of America. So those are clearly some advancements, still a way to go. Now, part of the reason some of these... Sorry, I think I skipped something. I'm going to go in a little bit backwards way here. I apologize. Part of the reason some of these groups have had to struggle a little bit to get protection is because of what's known as the levels of scrutiny set up by the courts. And I think you need to know these levels of scrutiny. All right, this court has kind of like, when we talked about probable cause, it's like this level of scrutiny. What truly is probable cause? All right. Is it just because you're a teenager? Is that probable cause to search your car? No, that's not enough. But if there's an odor coming out of your car, that gives police probable cause. In regards to civil rights, they've come up with 3 levels of scrutiny. And each level refers to how much protection is given. The group that is most protected is groups that are protected from racial discrimination. The Supreme Court views any law or process or regulation which discriminates people based upon race inherently suspect. In other words, it's basically illegal by its construction itself. All right. The next level of scrutiny is referred to as level of substantial scrutiny, sometimes called the intermediate or the medium level because there's 3 and it's the second one. This is reserved for issues of gender discrimination. So women receive, to be fair, all right, and from judicial terms, they receive less protection than individuals do from racial discrimination because of where they're placed within this kind of system of levels of scrutiny. The third level is just simply referred to as a level of reasonable scrutiny. And anything that's not an issue of gender discrimination or racial discrimination, those things I just kind of talked about, issues involving age, income perhaps, disabilities from earlier in the chapter, LGBTQ rights. Those things receive only a level of reasonable scrutiny. In other words, these groups, legally speaking, get less protection than racial discrimination and gender discrimination. All right, if you're offended by that, I would tell you perhaps the reason is the court sees that there's more historical kind of fight from other groups. Some of this frustration one might feel at times in regards to advancements is just a matter of time that's been put involved trying to push for advancements. And I think the more some of these other reasonable scrutiny groups continue their fight, the more protections they'll have going forward. All right. As a final comment for today, just some reminders. All right. Friday will be a test day for the class. All right. There'll be a test over Chapter 8 and a test over Chapter 9. I don't know why my slideshow wants to do that. All right. What you should be doing before Friday is completing the Chapter 8 and 9 practice tests in the AP Classroom. You could finish at any time on Friday and then take the class test that will be in the Google Classroom. Tomorrow I'll be reviewing Chapter 8 with the video that I make and providing more links for you to review online the entirety of the Chapters 8 and Chapter 9. I'm also including today with underneath this video some links to help you review the civil rights material or Chapter 9 from our current textbook. So I hope you all are doing well. Miss seeing you, and we'll talk to you soon.